Hey everybody, so what do you do when you're about to pull the trigger on a decision, but there's just something about that option you're considering that doesn't feel right, but you don't know why? That's what we're going to talk about today as we continue our series, Better Decisions, Fewer Regrets. Welcome!
Welcome everyone! We are so honored that you would spend part of your day with us. Jeremy, I call that feeling women's intuition.
Yes, the mystery that no man understands, but we all wish we had as well. We have something exciting coming up at Mosaic. It's baptism. It's a celebration of something that has happened on the inside, and we can't wait to celebrate with you all. If you're interested in getting baptized or joining us, please send a message on any of our social media channels, and we will make sure to get back to you with all the information needed to join.
I can't wait for that day. We plan on doing that early in May, so you still have some time to join in. At this time, we are going to hear a song that reminds us that no matter what we are going through, God is there on our side in all the mess, the chaos that surrounds us. He will never leave our side.
There's a grace when the heart is under fire. Another way when the walls are closing in. When I look at the space between where I used to be and this reckoning, I know I will never be alone. There is another in the fire, standing next to me. There is another in the waters, holding back the seas. Should I ever need reminding of how I've been set free, there is a cross that bears the burden, where another died for me. There is another in the fire. All my dead left for dead beneath the waters. I'm no longer a slave to my sin anymore. I should have fallen in the space between what remains of me and this reckoning. Either way, I'm bound to the things of this world. I know I will never be alone. There is another in the fire, standing next to me. There is another in the waters, holding back the seas. Should I ever need reminding, what power set me free? There is a grave that holds nobody. Now the power lives in me. There is another in the fire. There is another in the fire. I can see the light in the darkness as the darkness falls to him. I can hear the roar in the heavens as the space between words thin. I can feel the ground shake beneath us as the prison walls cave in. Nothing stands between us. Nothing stands between us. There is no other name but the name that is Jesus. He who was and still is and will be through it all. So come with me in the space between all the things unseen and this reckoning. I know I will never be alone. There'll be another in the fire.
I'm going to tell you a story that honestly I'm embarrassed about. Things did not work out well for me. It's a strange thing because it was the byproduct of a very good habit that I have. Throughout my entire life, I've always tried my best to surround myself with great people, people who are actually better than me. And for the most part, I've had great success in doing that. When me and Eloise first got married, we traveled a lot. I think in the first year of the marriage, we went to 7 or 8 different countries. And as we traveled around the world, I would always pop in and say hello to some friends along the way. And consistently, after every visit, Ella would turn and tell me, "You have great friends." And I do. I've surrounded myself with great people. The only downside to always having good people around me was that I was a little naive. I was very trusting to the people around me because I had surrounded myself with good people. We learned a few weeks ago the difference between a dishonest person and a deceitful person. Dishonest people are easier to detect than deceitful people. Dishonest is just straight up not honest. But deceitful people, they usually mix in a little bit of truth, half-truths and untruth. Deceitful people are the dangerous ones, and I found out that the hard way. About 7 years ago, I let someone into my circle who was deceitful. He appeared on the outside to be quite successful. He lived in a big house. He had many staff taking care of him. He was generous, thoughtful, and caring. He was actually quite charming. He would tell me of his apartments in New York and London and his houses in Nice, France, and how we should all go on a trip together. He seemed genuine. So when he approached me asking if I wanted to invest some money together with his money, he could get me a good return on my investment. And I thought to myself, wow, that's a great deal. He told me that he doesn't do this for everyone, but because we're good friends, he would make an exception for me. So me and Ella, we talked about it and decided to move forward with it. I mean, things worked out well initially. I mean, after 8 months, everything was going just as he said it would. That's when we began talking about adding some more money. And that's when something happened that we are going to discuss today. Ella began to feel a tension. She couldn't quite point to exactly what it was, but something on the inside of her didn't feel right. So stick around and I'll tell you about the disaster that followed. Well, today we're in part 3 of our series, Better Decisions, Fewer Regrets. And if you've been tracking along with us, you know that the big idea of this series is the often overlooked relationship between good questions and good decisions. Good questions actually set us up for the good or even better decisions. And I'm absolutely convinced that if you will get in the habit of asking, answering honestly, and acting on your answer to these 5 questions, you will make better decisions and you will consequently live with fewer regrets. Your life will be better, and the people who look to you, the people who depend on you, their lives will be better as well. Because, as we've said every week, we aren't the only people impacted by our decisions. And we are not the only people impacted by our regrets neither, right? So in part 1, I suggested you memorize this saying from the book of Proverbs. Hopefully some of you have done this, and the saying goes like this: "The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple, the naive, they just keep on going and they end up paying the penalty." This verse is a reminder to look beyond the moment, to not look away from the potential danger. These 5 questions will slow you down and help you see the danger coming. So, if you've been tracking along with us, our first question is the integrity question. The integrity question is this: am I being honest with myself? And then we added the word really. Am I being honest with myself really? Or am I selling myself on something I'm going to regret later? So I hope you've been honest with yourself, even if the truth makes you feel uncomfortable. Our second question was the legacy question. And the legacy question is this: what story do I want to tell? When the decision that you're in the process of making right now, whether it's relational, financial, academic, or professional, when the story or the decision you're making right now is reduced to a story, what do you want to tell? What story do you want told about you? And the good news is this: you get to decide. As far as it is up to you, you write the story of your life, one decision at a time. And that brings us to our third question. We call it the conscious question. A question we should ask anytime we're making a decision of any magnitude is this: is there a tension? Is there a tension that deserves my attention? While I'm making a decision, when I'm considering options and I'm sort of focusing in on one option, does that one option create a tension that deserves my attention? Now, sometimes, actually I think more times than we'd like to admit, an option that we're considering creates tension inside of us. It's something about it just doesn't seem exactly right. It gives us pause, causes us to hesitate, and initially, you know how this goes. Initially, we have no reason why. We have no idea why this is bothering me. I've heard this referred to, maybe you've heard this as well, referred to as a red flag moment. There's just something that doesn't seem right about this. Now, you may have another name for it, but you know what I'm talking about, right? It's just that internal sense of something about this. I don't know what it is. Something about this, don't ask me a lot of questions, something about this just doesn't seem right. And when that happens, you owe it to yourself to pause and pay attention to that tension. Pay attention to the tension. Don't ignore it. Don't brush by it. Don't rush by it. Don't talk yourself out of it. Pay attention. Let it bother you. Face it. Embrace it. But don't excuse it. Face that intention until it either goes away or you decide to go in a different direction. Now, there is a fascinating and rather well-known narrative from the life of King David, Israel's second king, that illustrates the importance of paying attention to a seemingly irrational, and in his case, an inconvenient tension. And I love this story. Now, as you probably know, David steps onto the pages of history as a shepherd boy. During that season of his life as a kid, a prophet shows up at his house where he's living with his family and announces to his family, imagine this, that God has chosen David to be the next king of Israel. Amazing, right? Now that's a good day. Now the problem, though, was that Israel already had a king, King Saul, but Saul was not doing a very good job, so God decided to replace him, but not quite yet. So times goes by, and young David has his legendary encounter with the Philistine giant Goliath that we all know about. And in that moment, after killing Goliath, David immediately becomes a household name throughout the kingdom of Israel. And it didn't take long before his popularity exceeded that of old King Saul, who was not doing a very good job kinging. In fact, if you know the story, Saul becomes jealous of David. He tries to kill David. David is forced to flee. He becomes a fugitive, but by now he's a legend. And as far as the people of Israel are concerned, he's a hero. He's a war hero. He killed Goliath. And by the time he left Saul's service, he had a reputation not only as a warrior, but as a leader. So dozens and then hundreds of men flocked to David's side. Before long, he had his own small little army, but it was an army without a home. It was an army made up of people just like David, fugitives from the law. So as the story goes, eventually Saul gets some really good intel on David's whereabouts, and he gathers together about 3,000 soldiers, which in ancient times was a huge army. It was virtually impossible to gather that many soldiers in one place. But somehow, King Saul pulls together 3,000 soldiers because he feared David and he knew his military skills. So he leads this column of soldiers into the desert of En-Gedi to remove this threat to the throne once and for all. So as far as the story goes, late one afternoon, as they're winding their way through this rocky, wind-swept hills of the desert of En-Gedi, Saul halts the entire column of men so he can find somewhere private to relieve himself. He spies a cave and he heads off unaccompanied to take care of business. Now, if you know the story, you know that this is where the story takes a strange and somewhat providential twist. David and a handful of his merry men are actually hiding in the very cave that Saul chooses. I mean, what are the odds of that? I mean, talk about the stars lining up, and God kind of looking right down on David. From David's perspective, this was a best case scenario. So imagine from David's perspective, he's back in the recesses of the cave. He's staring out at the mouth of the cave, and Saul appears just as a silhouette. Saul has just come in from the bright Middle Eastern sun. He can't really see a thing. He walks in just far enough to ensure his privacy. He takes off his robe. He tosses it to the side. He hikes up his outer garment, squats down, facing the opening of the cave with his back to David and his men. Clearly, if you're David, right, clearly this was an omen. This was a sign from God. God had delivered David's enemies into his hands. What else could this possibly mean? I mean, he'd already been anointed king. Everybody knew it. He was next. The only thing standing in his way was the current king. And there he is, unguarded, vulnerable, unsuspecting. And if David wasn't thinking that, we know that the men around him were because of David's biographer. Well, here's what he says. He says to his men, he whispered to David as they were in the back of the cave. They whispered to David, David, look, this is the day the Lord spoke of. This is the day the Lord spoke of when he told you a long time ago, I will give your enemy into your hands for you to deal with as you wish. And there he is. David, this is what you predicted, what happened. Decision made, let's kill Saul, let's go home, enough of this wilderness fugitive living. This was the perfect scenario. I mean, no civil war. Think about that. No civil war, minimal bloodshed. So they're thinking, David, come on, just do it. Kill the king before the king kills you. Besides, what other option is there? I mean, remain an outlaw for the rest of our lives? This needed to end. And this was the perfect, clearly God-ordained time to end it. So you can just imagine the emotion in that cave, the adrenaline, and imagine the pressure on David that he felt to act. But here's what makes the story even more interesting. David felt something else as well. There was a tension about this. There was a hesitation. Something about this wasn't exactly right, but he wasn't sure what it was. Because in this scenario, in this context, the hesitation didn't make any sense at all. So he did what many of us do. He decided to act. He drew his dagger. He crept up behind Saul with every intention of ending Saul's life. And if David is successful, the world as he knows it, that his men knew it, would change instantly. But as he gets closer, that tension increases. And David, this is so unimaginable, so amazing. And David, in spite of the fact that there seemed to be no alternative, David paid attention to that tension. He let what was bothering him bother him. And somewhere between leaving his hiding place back in the cave, Saul's unprotected back, it dawns on him just seconds away from making a decision everybody would understand. And everybody would applaud in just seconds. It's just seconds away. He gains clarity. Wait a minute. I'm about to murder the king. This isn't war. This isn't combat. This is murder. And this can't be right. Besides, he thought, who put Saul on the throne of Israel to begin with? Who made Saul the king? God did. And who am I to replace what God has put in place? This can't be God's plan. I can't kill the king, even if the king is trying to kill me. So this is amazing. In spite of the pressure to act, in spite of the expectation of the friends just a few yards behind him, David changes course. And now this is the part of the story where we all have something in common with David, believe it or not. Here's what we have in common with David. David didn't know what the outcome of killing Saul would be. Now think about this. David didn't know for sure what the outcome of killing Saul would be. He thought he did. But there was no guarantee things would work out the way that he envisioned things working out. I mean, he thought he knew. The men with him, they thought they knew. It's simple. Kill the king, become the king. Problem solved, right? But there was no guarantee that that would be the outcome. Now, please, don't miss this. One of the reasons, this is so important, one of the reasons we ignore the tension when we're making a decision, one reason we just push through and ignore the advice of other people or the voice of our conscience, we believe that we can predict the future, that we can predict or even control outcomes. But you don't always predict outcomes accurately, do you? I mean, does anybody? Let me ask you this. Have you ever been disappointed? Well, of course you have. And what's disappointment? Disappointment is the result of an unexpected outcome. And here's my point. Ignoring that tension in your gut, ignoring that tension sets us up for disappointment. Paying attention to that tension allows whatever it is that is bothering you to bother you. That's how you avoid unnecessary disappointment and regret. Now, back to David. He's feet away from Saul, and it dawns on him, hey, just because I kill the king doesn't mean I'll necessarily become the king. But one thing is for certain, I'll be the man who killed the king. That's going to be my story for the rest of my life. That will be my legacy. That'll be the story that I have to tell my children. And that story I'm going to have to tell my grandchildren. Imagine that. Grandpa, tell us one more time how you became the king, how you snuck out behind King Saul, our great-grandpa, while he was using the potty and you slit his throat. You're so brave. You see, that's not the story David wanted to tell. And that's not the story David wants to be told about him. In fact, the author of the story says this, that David was conscience-stricken. Conscience-stricken. This is how we know he was paying attention to the tension. So somehow, some way, he paid attention to his conscience, and he does something very few people have the self-control to do. He changed mid-course. He changed midstream. Instead of murdering Saul, he cuts off a corner of Saul's discarded robe. And he makes his way back to the men in the back of the cave. And of course, they're all in shock. They were so close to going home, only to watch the perfect opportunity slip away. And the expressions on their face, they said it all. They basically were saying, David, you got some explaining to do. And so he whispers. The biographer tells us that he whispers to his men, the Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master. The Lord's anointed. To which they whispered back to him, well, then let us do it. Well, David sharply rebuked his men and did not allow them to attack Saul. And Saul left the cave and went on his merry way, having no idea how close he came to losing his life that afternoon. Saul, he rejoins his men. He gets back on his mule. He's preparing to continue his search for David when suddenly, this is such an interesting, dramatic part of the story, when suddenly he hears a voice calling his name, Saul, Saul, and 3,000 heads turn, and there stands the very man they've been hunting, the man they've been paid to kill, the giant killer. There stands David. And he's in the mouth of the cave that Saul has just exited. I mean, can you imagine the drama of this moment? He's holding something in his right hand. It's a piece of cloth. It's the color of Saul's royal robe. And Saul yanks his cape around, and sure enough, the corner is missing. And then David bows down to the ground at the mouth of the cave. He bows down, and then he stands to his feet, and everybody recognized in that moment that David was the better man. Once again, David was the hero in his own story. He spared Saul's life when everybody knew that Saul would have taken his. And after a short speech, David concludes with this powerful, powerful statement, a statement that we should all take to heart. He says to Saul, with everyone listening, may the Lord judge between you and me. May the Lord be the judge between you and me. I'll wait, and I'll allow God to determine the outcome of this conflict. I will not take matters into my own hands. I will not replace what God has put into place, and I will not play God in your life or in mine. I will not use your bad behavior as an excuse to do bad things. I will not be like you, Saul. A measured response for sure. A measured response that resulted from paying attention to an inconvenient, talk about inconvenient, an inconvenient, irrational tension. Now back to the story. All eyes are on Saul. He's been humiliated by David. But here is the amazing thing. He wasn't humiliated by David's military skill. He was humiliated by David's humility. So what do you do now if you're the King Saul? Do you continue to pursue a man who could have taken your life but chose not to? Do you close your eyes and say, all right, I'm going to count to 100 and give you a head start? I mean, even Saul knows better. So he turns his army around and he heads back to the city. Months later, Saul and his army are embroiled in a battle with the Philistines when a random Philistine archer stationed just behind the infantry launches an arrow intended to fall randomly among the Israelite army. But this random archer's random arrow found a seam in Saul's armor, and he's mortally wounded. He doesn't want to die at the hands of the Philistines, so he falls on his own sword, and he dies as the Israelite army is routed. And when word reaches the city, the citizens of the primary city of that time, they proclaim David king, and he becomes the king without murdering the king. And maybe, I don't know, this isn't in the text. I think maybe David thought to himself, well, if somebody had told me it was just going to work out like that, it certainly would have made that whole cave episode a lot easier. If God has shown up and said, David, just relax. 7 chapters from now, the Philistines are going to take care of Saul for you. Wouldn't that have made the things so much easier? But you know this, and that's not how life works, is it? That's why we have to pay attention to the tension. That's why we dare not take matters into our own hands. That's why we dare not trust our ability to predict the future or control outcomes. That's why whenever you're making a decision of any consequence, you have to stop and ask yourself, is there a tension that deserves my attention? Now back to my embarrassing story. Ella began to feel a tension rise within her as we looked into investing more with my so-called friend. A tension I dismissed and proceeded ahead regardless. And in the end, we were victims of a Ponzi scheme. We lost a lot of money that will change our family's life forever, all because I didn't pause. I didn't pay attention to the tension. Don't make my mistake. It was a tough lesson to learn, and I don't want that for you. Well, eventually, he was found out and spent a couple of years in jail. But here's what I know about you. The decision that you're wrestling with right now falls somewhere between a small and insignificant decision and losing a lot of money in a Ponzi scheme. But the principle is the same. If there's something in you, if there's something you can't quite put your finger on, and now it bothers you, just stop. Pay attention. Give it some time. Let it bother you until you know why it bothers you. Don't ignore it. Don't brush by it. It may be, I don't know, it may be God's way of protecting you and protecting your family. This may be His way of keeping you from a decision that you will live to regret. That inconvenient, seemingly irrational tension may be a pathway to another option you never considered, an option you didn't even know was available. So here's the question. Is there a tension that deserves your attention? Every time you're considering an option, every time you're making a decision of any consequence, stop and ask the question, is there a tension that deserves my attention? And if so, pay attention to that tension. Like David, you'll be glad that you did.
Thank you, Jeremy. I know that was a very difficult lesson for us to learn as a family, but I hope it lets you all know that we all make mistakes, and each mistake is an opportunity to learn and grow. As we end the service today, I want us all to think through a question that will help us process what we've just heard. Have you ever been really close to pressing go on a big decision, but at the last minute bailed for no other reason than something about it just didn't seem right? Did more information surface after you hit pause? That's it for us today. I hope you all have a great rest of your week, and we will see you all in the next video. God bless everyone.